Hello everyone, I would like to share a lecture on cultural landscape in Malaysia. So look at this, the World Cultural Heritage Landscape. This is the rice terraces of Cordilleras located at Luzon, Philippines. Why this rice paddy field is unique is because if you look at the steeper slopes and also the mud wall and the whole natural contour of the hills form the unique mountain or the terrace fields. It's also complete by the important irrigation system for water harvesting from the forest of the mountain top, and it can complete for the whole farming system. We believe that this landscape is not created in a short time. It was passed from one generation to another generation since 2000 years ago. So you can see how unique of this cultural landscape. Alright, to understand the cultural landscape itself, you need to know the definition, especially the basic definitions. So the cultural landscape defined by UNESCO as the combination of work of man and nature. In another simple words to explain this is how the man modify the natures. During the process of modification the nature, the humankind or the man, the process of succession will involve the social, economic and culture. So during the succession periods, the modification will change the natural environment to what you see the current unique cultural landscape. Right now, there are 102 cultural landscape properties have been inscribed on the World Heritage List. You can search the detail of each cultural landscape property in the UNESCO World Heritage Site. All the World Heritage Cultural Landscape Sites are protected under the Heritage Convention for the Outstanding Universal Value. So, the criteria for World Cultural Heritage Landscape are referred to cultural criteria than natural criteria. I believe if you still remember the second lectures that I have developed in the second week, I have been mentioned that there are 10 important criteria to determine the uniqueness of cultural landscape as well as other World Heritage Sites. So there are 6 categories for cultural criteria and another 4 is to cover for natural criteria. Alright. For the categories of cultural landscape, it divided to 3 categories. Since 1992, cultural landscape already well known internationally. Therefore, UNESCO World Heritage Site has decided to divide the cultural landscape into 3 categories. The first category where is the landscape was designed intentionally by man. This is where we can see the example of the mimic garden or the parkland landscape. For instance, here is the example is like a botanic garden in Singapore. So the purpose of having this garden is just only for the aesthetic purpose, but it also for other functions. It could be for religious or monumental building and etc. Second, organically involved landscape. For this category, it includes that social, economic, administrative, and religious purposes. So The reason of this social activity is response to its natural environment. In these categories is also divided to two, which is a release landscape or fossil landscape, as well as continued landscape. The example of relic landscape such as mining landscape, for continued landscape where to continue their traditional way of life, such as the indigenous cultural landscape. The third category is the associated cultural landscape. Associated cultural landscape is defined by the landscape of power, religious, artistic, or cultural association of the natural element rather than material cultural evidence. So, which are be insignificant or even absent. Alright, cultural landscape in Asia regions also have its own definitions. So Asia cultural landscape also can define as agricultural landscape. Normally in Japan and Korea, they will use the term agricultural landscape. For instance, in Japan, Satoyama used to define as a cultural landscape. So what is Satoyama? Satoyama is characterized by agricultural field and the households surrounding by the mountain. And the special features of the Satoyama or the cultural landscape are paddy field, secondary vegetation, pines, mixed deciduous species. Deciduous species here means that the surrounding landscape could be of surrounded by the forest. So in Asia cultural landscape, also very close meet related to the feng shui theory. It's much related to the Chinese cultural landscape, which they have the very strong philosophy of Chinese garden. And the right side of this slide, you can see that the list of 7 countries in Asia region have its unique and significant cultural landscape. So by referring to the previous slide, you can categorize the 3 categories cultural landscape. Following, let's continue with the cultural landscape in Malaysia. So this is tea plantations in Cameron Highlands. Okay, the cultural landscape in Malaysia context, also known as a rural landscape. According to Abdullah, or Associate Professor Saiful Abdullah, he has defined cultural landscape in Malaysia mainly influenced by socio-economic and different ethnic background. So in his research, he has defined that there are 5 aspects or parameters which is important to characterizing the cultural landscape in Malaysia: history, geography, climate, cultural and social background, religious. All these parameters are important to contribute to Malaysian cultural landscape. In his study, he also defined that cultural landscape features are generated or formed by historical features, traditional features, and non-traditional features. So historical features is the historical background or historical of the site. The traditional features is related to tangible elements such as building and also structures that form the cultural landscape itself. For non-traditional features such as landscape and more intangible aspects. The formation of cultural landscape in Malaysia is influenced by the urbanization, the early growth of towns since British colonization. So we can see the trend of how the types of cultural landscape is formed in Malaysia. Next slide will explain more detail. There are several types of cultural landscape as defined by Raja Ahmad. The first category of cultural landscape in Malaysia is the rice cultivation landscape. So this is the famous paddy field in Kedah and the well-known Masa Aman Canal. The irrigation system is very important because it's connecting the swamp forest from the south of Alustar and form this the flat muddy paddy field. There are the informations to support the history of this cultural landscape. The use of the planting technologies and the skill of the rice cultivations are inherited from the Hindu-Buddhist kingdom and the early period and the Thai people from Patani and later have passed to the Kedah people so become a main rice producer for the whole Malaysia. So the uniqueness of the rice paddy cultivation in Kedah is not only because of the canalization system, the irrigation system itself, is also influenced by the history and the technique of paddy plantation. Next is the coastal landscape. The coastal landscape in Malaysia is divided into two categories. One is the coastal landscape of East Coast and the West Coast. So these pictures show the traditional fisherman village and the setting of the fisherman village of Kuala Terengganu. The main parameters or aspects they show the significance of cultural landscape for this fisherman or the coastal landscape is because of the socio-economic activity. So through these pictures, you can see that fishermen activities and fish products are important main economic source or revenue for the local people. Next is the coastal landscape of west coast of Malaysia. So Kuala Sepetang coastal landscape is the best case study to show a coastal landscape. It's surrounded by the mangrove forest. It's an excellent example to show a human activity in the mangrove environment. So the Kuala Sepetang coastal landscape is characterized by the Chinese fisherman village in the coastal mangrove forest. So in this study is about the human of mangrove ecosystem. The mangrove forests in the area of Kuala Sepetang have been protected for over 100 years as the Matang Forest Reserve. So it is a potential for a sustainable utilization have been studied extensively. Another famous economic activity you can see here is the charcoal factory in Kuala Sepetang. So you can see that the cultural association, the human activity of using the natural resources have formed the unique coastal landscape or the west coast coastal landscape in Malaysia. Next category of cultural landscape in Malaysia is the Minangkabau settlement. Minangkabau settlement is very important not only to see the old palace of Seri Menanti and its architecture, as well as the strong influence by adat Pepatih. The old Minangkabau settlement layout is influenced by the river valley and also paddy settlement. It follows the record of the past study, the layout of distribution of this Minangkabau settlement is followed by the clan cluster. Next is the mixed farming landscape. So I believe that you are familiar with the felda. Why oil palm plantation is also categorized as a cultural landscape in Malaysia. The formations of this landscape is due to the economic transformations after the World War II in Malaysia. It is one of the landscape planned by man with the purpose of the economic. Beside the plantations, it also formed an important settlement which is known the Felda. There are many Felda villages in Malaysia. Another unique cultural landscape in Malaysia is the tea plantations. So you can see here that the tea plantation at Cameron Highland. The importance of the natural setting of the highland landscape have provided a good climate and the landscape conditions for tea plantations is important for not only the social but as well as for economic purpose. Mining landscape is the number 6 categories of the cultural landscape in Malaysia. So this Taiping Lake Garden is the formations where the mining pond is transformed and used to become a lake garden. The history of the mining activity begins since colonization. So the transformation of industrial heritage has changed the landscape not only for the parklands, but they are now changing for many other purpose usage. Next, I would like to show more example of the cultural landscape in Johor Bahru. I think you are familiar with the Tanjung Piai, the Ramsar site of Johor Bahru. Ramsar site is very important as a convention wetland. So this is where the important ecosystem of mangrove ecosystem found in Johor. So you can see the combination of Sungai Pulai, Kukuk and Tanjung Piai. The picture shows the largest of riverine mangrove system in the Johor state. I believe the Sungai Pulai here most are the virgin mangrove forests. There are also some activities that happen in Sungai Pulai, Ramsar site. So you can see also the indigenous people are depend on the mangrove for their livelihood as well as for the children use the mangrove area as a playground. And not forget also the important agricultural landscape in Johor Bahru, which is the pineapple farm. If you have the chance, so you can visit the pineapple farm at Pontian. It's one of the important agriculture economic activity to Johor State. This is a coastal landscape of Johor Bahru, Muslim fisherman village. So you can see that the setting of the fisherman village more or less same like in Kuala Terengganu. So the houses was built near to the riverine. Lowland natural landscape was also very important in Johor State. So this is the Endar Rompin National Park in Mersing. This park is made of the large green tropical plants, flora, and fauna. So this lowland forest is the protected forest in Johor region. By looking at the overall cultural landscape in Malaysia, there is also facing many issues. There is a threat to Malaysia cultural landscape, which unfortunately is what's happened until now. There are the few issues here was defined by the researchers where the threats to the Malaysian cultural landscape, deteriorations, urban development, extractions of resources, large scale of development project like Iskandar development, tourism, local on-site management deficiency, cultural change of deficiency. By looking at the infographic, I think you can understand that the change of the landscape is the most concerning. It's caused mainly by the urban development, rapid development, tourism, as well as the large scale of social, cultural impacted to the urban and the local landscape. Before I end the lecture here, I would like you to think about why cultural landscape is important and what we can do to sustain and remain the unique cultural landscape in Malaysia.